Hi, this is Christian Buckley with Collab Talk.
Hello, this is Michael Subotkiewicz from KanBo.
We're talking today about the evolution of SharePoint within the enterprise. And I know that, since day one, the focus of SharePoint has always been on that enterprise space. Like the first real deployment that I did with SharePoint was with the year 2005. And I had seen it before. I'd interacted. I'd actually been up to Microsoft campus in Redmond, Washington. I was living in California at the time and went and visited and saw an early version of the next, the upcoming version of the platform. And that was in August of 2004. And I was, I'll just say, Michael, I was not impressed at that time. I'd been working with some other very advanced, PLM, product lifecycle management collaboration technology in that space, much more advanced, much more expensive. But went and did this deployment for this company in 2005 and really, I think, understood the vision of what SharePoint was going to become and got on board. And a year later, I was working for Microsoft. What was your first foray into SharePoint?
So it was with the version 2003, so I guess it was the same version.
Right.
And, but I was just a user then. And then with the 2007, we won our first project, and it was completely new. There was no documentation. It was actually, we were refactoring, so reverse engineering and reading the code because there was no documentation. There was only the name of the method and the parameters. So we needed to understand what it does. And this is how we got into this. And we starting then to realize SharePoint is going to be the next file system where people store files, because we were then only, social collaboration. There was no real, flash behind it. It was about exchanging files, and it has a nice user interface. And the killer feature for me then was the versioning of files. I could just save the file without, trying to push all the meta information into the file name, like before holiday, after the party, before the party, blah, blah, blah. No, just save it. And don't worry, you will find the version that was there before, and then you press this magic button, and then you see Word comparing those two versions. Magic. I was impressed.
Well, you had something else that happened with that 2007 version. 2003 was still, just kind of this nerdy back room, but mostly, kind of IT poking around at it. 2007, and when you had WSS, so when, the Windows SharePoint services really started to take off, is when you could have, non-technical people that had a little bit of capability, but where they were tired of hearing from their IT organization, like, no, you can't go do that. This is not supported. Where we've got these other initiatives, these higher priorities to go and do. So no, we're not going to go and do that for you now. And so people just started downloading the free version. They had their enterprise agreements for Windows and for everything else for their company. And they said, well, we've got this free SharePoint thing. Let's just go and install it ourselves. Joining Microsoft, I saw this happen where the people were going around the centralized IT organization and going and, different teams and organizations were going and building these spot solutions, these team-based solutions, and using it and getting productivity and modifying it, customizing it, branding it, doing all these things. And then by the time it got back to IT, it was often from the perspective of an executive had then seen what this team did without permission from IT and got value out of it. And the executive's like, you IT, go support this. Like, we want more of this. Roll it out for everybody. And then IT found themselves scrambling. So that was that transition. And I think you even saw within the reports, just user surveys of how people were using it, that in that time that from going from 2003, SharePoint 2003, 2007 into SharePoint 2010, it was the transition into the enterprise, where it really became viewed as this enterprise-wide, company-wide, everybody needs to participate within this. Is that so?
Yeah.
When did you start? The concepts that became KanBo. When did that really kind of come to you?
So look, it was my daughter was born, and I realized that I didn't want to waste my precious time, because then you realize that your time is pressure, not pressure but precious, and we were then completely with the whole company concentrating on SharePoint consulting, development, customization, and stuff like that. And then, I mean, the only good technology that we knew about then was actually SharePoint. So, but we needed a different, user interface. So it was faster and in context and so on. And then, we then started like, let's build something that has a completely different UI. So, don't try to explain anybody like how to upload a file, how to do this, how to do that in SharePoint. Just try to do it so it's natural, like drag and dropping. And then we came up with this idea of Kanban and of cards. But then we started back then, so 6 years ago was the first concept. Just connect to the services of SharePoint. So if we cover the UI, what do we have then? We only have the services. We have a great web service that back then where we can upload files, we can add fields, we can have custom fields, we can if you have a board, then let's create a site for that. So whatever we cannot do in KanBo, we can then do as customization on the site. So we have a customization platform if we want to. And then let's keep them in sync, because nobody wants to, put the users into KanBo, into a board, and do it the same in SharePoint again. So we also have in KanBo 3 levels, like the owners, the members, and the visitors. I mean, where do we have the idea from? I don't know. So it's
right.
it's something that was. I mean, of course, in SharePoint you've got so many others like designer and approver and stuff like that. But I mean, what 1% uses it? Most of the users only use 3, and also we took the best out of SharePoint,
right,
and put a much easier interface that was related on productivity, on context, and so on. Also, the stuff like following. I mean, in the 2010, you could follow a document. Then in I think 13, you could also follow a person, because you had this news feed. But it's still, those contexts are not very handy, because the document is part of many contexts, the person is part of many contexts, and you need a better tool to follow stuff. So all this came together, but we saw SharePoint more and more as a great platform with a lot of services that would take ages for us to program.
Right.
Then we have this foundation, which is actually an entry point. We get to a customer and say like, hey, you don't have to buy SharePoint because and then they say like, I would like also to have the search and so on. Okay, if you are there, then you can buy SharePoint now, because now you're ready, you understand the value. But the entry point was much better for us.
Right. And I think the reality, though, is that you found is SharePoint has become more and more ubiquitous. I'm sure you experienced this, that it wasn't even an either or. It was most organizations already had it in place. And so going and adding on to that, extending that. But that's a couple things that you brought up. I mean, one is you're looking at the roles around that. It's interesting that yes, you can go in and be very specific and design if you're in your organization using SharePoint. This has been very important for years. Is developing your roles, defining the permissions around that, and SharePoint has been excellent at that. But ultimately, when it comes down to completion of tasks and participation in projects, it really does come down to what Barry Oshry is, a management consultant, been around for a long time, and Microsoft actually has a lot of leadership development training that's based on his model of tops, middles, and bottoms, meaning that any specific task, there's somebody that has the executive view, there's somebody that's that management view, they own it, and then there's people that are completing tasks at the bottom of that. Your role on any task, it could change. Sometimes you're the executive, sometimes you're the manager, sometimes you're the field worker, the doer, around that. And so having the ability to switch context depending on the activity at hand, what you own, what you manage, what you are doing, it's really important to be able to capture that. And I think that is just something, sorry, side thought around this, but has really helped shape permissions management. And one of the primary values of SharePoint is helping structure that permissions management for all of the other tools and systems that are in the mix, that are integrated in, that are part of enterprise collaboration. And SharePoint helped do that for so many enterprises, and for partners like KanBo to come in and then develop solutions and then leverage that capability. I think that's really powerful. But I mean, where SharePoint went, I mean, again, 2013 is where I think Microsoft, the light went off, like, of starting to leverage what they've been building as a service. And then certainly with SharePoint 2016, and as Office 365, took off really around 2013, and then going forward from there, where Office 365 is leveraging increasingly, it's less about SharePoint as that interface. Not that that goes away. Your intranet is SharePoint based. If your primary workloads are SharePoint based, that's all still there. Your users may go to SharePoint as the front face for everything else they do in Office 365. My organization, my little team of 5 people, however, our primary interface is Microsoft Teams. And how I go in, I leverage KanBo through to Microsoft Teams. I leverage SharePoint sites as a service behind what I do. When I'm uploading content, documents for my customers that are in channels in Teams, where I'm managing content that I'm pulling and I'm modifying as part of my project plan in KanBo, all of that content being stored within SharePoint, securely managed, all the permissions based around that, but it all works seamlessly together because we're now leveraging SharePoint as a service. I mean, is that kind of what you see, that like even more so down that path for the future of SharePoint?
I mean, it is actually a great confirmation of the idea we had 6 years ago, saying, hey, don't try too hard to change the SharePoint user interface, because you can bend it, but you can very, very quickly also break it. And then an update comes, you're dead, and so on. So just now you see I think the first tool that really did it was Planner. Planner came and said, like, I am storing documents, I am reusing, all the infrastructure. Then it came Teams. Teams also, I mean, Teams is most of the services that are consumed by Teams is actually, I would say, it's SharePoint, then it comes Exchange. So the whole application is probably run somewhere on Azure, and it's a completely new brand new code, but it's also reusing the existing services. And that's a confirmation for me, from my perspective, that we definitely chose the right path. Microsoft realized that, I mean, Microsoft now has, introduced this new front page, this SharePoint framework, which is React based, which allows you, build whatever pages you like, and connect to the backend services, do the magic in the front. But you can rely, when you store a document, it's versioned, it's compliant, and you can tweak the security and do a lot of stuff. But the front end can be as beautiful as any other software or as any other website today. So it gives you now a lot possibilities to come with your own design. So I think there will be no SharePoint anymore as we know it. It will become better as a service, as the platform behind, as the pipes and the cables, and then you build a house, and then you just take it and connect it, and it's working, and then you design your own house, but the electricity and the pipes come from SharePoint. Right. This is how I see it. And the confirmation from Microsoft already in the products that arise as well. And of course, Azure is the next big.
Right. And I think Microsoft messaging, and I think it's the right one too, just again, for organizations that have spent the last decade or more, making SharePoint kind of their front end for all these different things. And which is to say that the organizations where that model still works and they want that, they can still go and do that. But as you're, I think part of the difficulty with the evolution of SharePoint has been that if you go and you build that structured intranet portal model solution, what you then do is you restrict how flexible you are to go and add new capabilities on top of that. So that's why you have Office 365 outpacing the growth of what SharePoint was, the record-breaking growth in Microsoft's product history, and Office 365 grew faster. It was that hockey stick up, where it's then allowing you to consume the various services that are out there, and SharePoint being one of those. If I have a team, or if I have a project within my company where it makes sense for them there to interact, where they're building workflow, the structured collaboration, and where they need to tightly manage the content that and who is participating within that, and going and building out a team site and building that structure and adding third-party tools, workflow tools, and other automation capability makes perfect sense for the context of that team. Whereas, my marketing team needs something that's more, that high velocity, that's project centric, where I may go use, Microsoft Teams, where we have it's the conversation-based interface where we're leveraging our project plans that are, out using, KanBo, and so that we have the robust card-based interaction where our content is being securely stored in OneDrive for Business, and which is SharePoint, or within the relevant SharePoint team site. But the interface and the tools that I'm using, is not held back by the limitations of building on the SharePoint platform. And so that's, I think we have to be careful, just from, the PC statement of, the end of SharePoint as we know it. Like, SharePoint continues, it's thriving and still growing. The number of net new installs of SharePoint on-prem still growing, still going up. It's still expanding. It's a hugely successful platform for Microsoft. But it's increasingly going to be consumed as a service, as a component in customer-based, customer-focused, customer context solutions, rather than let's go get SharePoint and see how we can shape it into what we need. It's going to be, here's what I need. SharePoint is this component and this component, but I then go and get the other pieces. Here's how I bring it together. Yeah.
And maybe last point, but also very important. I mean, installing a SharePoint 2016 with all its possibility services, it's not an easy task, and I think not many companies can really afford to have like 3 farms, like station.
Yeah, all the infrastructure, right? And the people to manage all of that, right?
And now you go to the Office 365 and you have it just like that, and the people who have invented it actually are managing it. So what can go wrong? So if you are really interested on this kind of customization with the SharePoint provider hosted apps and the SharePoint apps, it's possible to change your SharePoint, even if it's online, if it's shared. So you can do whatever you want. But if you are a top secret company working on some top secret engine or whatever, you will probably want to have these possibilities somewhere on-prem on your highly secured environment, but still have and use the services the other companies are using, but in your secure environment. So this is what SharePoint is about. I think it's if you know what you're doing, if you know what you want, then SharePoint can give you most of it. Right. And it has an API, and a lot of people already specializing, like for example us. I mean, someday I made the bet on this product some years ago, and I see it was a good bet.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, if you know what you want, then there are more and more options to go and build with SharePoint as a piece of that. I know there was a lot of concerns as Microsoft was focusing on Office 365 and innovating for the cloud first. Microsoft has done a great job, I believe, of coming back around and saying, look, there's ways through hybrid solutions to leverage what you've done on-prem or continue to do on-prem, as well as go and consume some of these cloud-based services, and again, create the solution that you want. We've moved from and then the other half of that is, if you don't know what you want, there are canned solutions that are out there. You can, out of the box, go and leverage Office 365 and leverage SharePoint that way. And it's, using the templates, using this, that functionality. And then as your knowledge, your SharePoint maturity grows, your collaboration maturity grows, you know what you want. You can then transition that out into this custom solution. That's why I believe SharePoint has been so successful, because it was a platform upon which you could go build. And while it took time for Microsoft with the transition to the cloud and I think they scared a lot of partners and customers, and what are you doing? You're closing the ecosystem down. They needed to do these go through this business transformation to get to where they are now with the SharePoint framework, with Office 365, with all of these other services that are out there, to enable organizations to move away from having to hire and maintain infrastructure and infrastructure experts, and instead focus more on integrations. And so the bringing people in, experts to build out, but then to very quickly connect, even without having to hire an outside consulting group, easily connect to these disparate systems and get more value. And so it really has helped transform how we look at our collaboration systems. Certainly it could only have been done by Microsoft, because SharePoint has become so dominant. But they have gone from being viewed as this laggard with SharePoint on-prem to really being the innovators. And I don't know if you saw, there was just a study that was done, report was out last week, that millennials now, the #1 company that they would like to work for, tech company, is Microsoft, because they view it as the most innovative, where they'll be able to be creative. And it's pretty exciting to see that Microsoft is cool again. But so much of it has been because of SharePoint and Office 365 and what those teams have done.
Yes, definitely. And I think, the change that Microsoft, I think it was started even before Satya. We are all in the cloud, or we are all in.
We're all in the bomber message. Yep.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, he couldn't, then really maybe bring it to the end or whatever. But I think this was the beginning, and I had my doubts. But Microsoft, they got the curve. They are now on the right track, and now we partners must adapt to the new reality that is much faster, much more changes, no 3 years cycles anymore. And in the beginning, I can tell you from my experience, it is heartbreaking and hard. But after you know where to find the information and what information are relevant, maybe what's not relevant, and so on, you find your way, you see the opportunities, and you see that is actually the only way. Otherwise, we would go down with Microsoft all down.
Right.
They had to change. Now it's our turn.
Right. It's, and I think you'd agree, as technologists, I mean, we live in exciting times. It really is opening up, what is possible out there, building on top of what we've been able to leverage with SharePoint, and going and whatever direction makes sense for us, for our customers. It's an exciting space. But Michael, hey, thanks a lot for your time. Interesting topic, the evolution of SharePoint. But I'm sure we're going to be talking about this again.
Yeah, sure. SharePoint is a great topic. Thanks a lot.